Dun, dun, dun.
Them are fast, just a matter of how much time it takes. It's not dial-up, so we can't really. I mean,
Remember that chime stuff? I just don't know.
oh yeah.
Let's go.
Okay. Well, greetings, everyone. Thank you for being here for the City of Philomath's Finance and Administration Committee meeting for September 18th. We'll first get started with a roll call.
Jessica Andrade.
Present.
Teresa Nielsen.
Here.
And Chaz Jones.
Here. And we also have City Manager Chris Workman, Finance Director Mike Mazinski, City Recorder, and have a guest, David Lowe, who's here for visitors' comments, and which is the next thing on our agenda.
Well, I'm visiting. I wanted to just address a topic I think was on the agenda for today in terms of PCS, the letter that I'd sent to the council, and I put it back to the committee to go over that. So, just very quickly, I just want to make 3 points about the letter. It seems kind of a while back now, and I just kind of recap. So, first of all, my intent is not to put Chris on the spot or say the city manager didn't do something, blah, blah, blah. I think that what came up at the council meeting back in August was addressed fine. Chris did a great job in taking responsibility for the timing of our ask getting to the council. And I appreciate, Chris, your candidness, candor rather, just accepting responsibility for that. So my concern isn't really that way. The purpose of my letter really to council was to just inform you, and drawing on my experience as a former councillor when I was making decisions, how important it is to have sufficient information on hand before you make a decision. So that's really the purpose of what I wanted to do. And maybe I hope the council will be able to make better decisions in the future, really going forward. The second thing is funding source. Again, I do appreciate the having PCS, the council awarding us the $6,000. Definitely appreciate that. And I know in my letter I requested maybe the council revisit that, the source of that funding. Possibly will, possibly won't. But I want to let you know that whatever the council decides, of course, that's your choice if you want to revisit or not. But I think the letter outlines some reasons why you might want to consider it. And then the process. The process is, I think, my biggest concern. And maybe we at PCS didn't phrase our request in a way that made it clear, but we were not asking as a nonprofit or a social service, community service organization for $6,000. That was not our intent. What our issue was that the city was taking away meaningful parking for this organization. So whether, if you kind of put it out of your mind that we're a community service organization and just think of it as McDonald's or any other business that has parking allocated to it that's on their property, and if that parking is taken away by the city for whatever good reason, that there'd be some discussion about should that business be compensated or should some other adjustment be made. In fairness, Chris did offer. Chris has been very, very good about supporting us at PCS, offering ideas, suggesting how we might go about doing things at the least expense, and we really do appreciate that. In this particular case, circumstances were such that we really couldn't follow through on timing, and just other things just didn't work for us. So anyway, my issue is that we should not have been put in the category of thinking of it as a social service agency, and unfortunately because of the timing, of course, we're in the new year, the allocation's up, it makes perfect sense. Like, oh yeah, this is the way we can do it. But I think with that other information is important. And then just sort of anecdotally, when I was in council, it was a big deal about transparency in everything that we do. The matter really wasn't on the agenda for that particular meeting. Public would know that we were asking for this. And so I just think it's careful that if there's something that comes before council and maybe there's some sort of, I don't know, if there's something else there that you might want to consider that before discussing it. Anyway, thank you so much. Those are my 3 points, and I'll be happy to answer.
Do you have any questions of Mr. Lowe?
I think I might have one. The parking situation. That was initially when that was allotted to PCS. Was that city land or was that PCS land that, I mean, what was the arrangement initially with that parking area that was allotted?
Parking area has always been owned by the city, and the city, I don't know at the time, offered to have PCS go ahead and use it for parking, and it was gravel. About 8 years ago or so, maybe 7 years ago, PCS was able to get some funding to asphalt it and came a little more formally and said, hey, is it okay if we asphalt this parking area so that we can continue to use it? And the city said, yeah, that's fine. And I believe even that early we were talking about future discussions of a future plant and what that might look like, but we didn't have dates or anything at that time. And so the decision was made to use that. I think it was a grant that came in for the asphalt.
Yeah,
some of
there
that grant
were a
funding.
number of donors, there was a number of people involved, parties involved in that.
So while I was here, again, it was maybe that whenever it got paved, that was kind of the more formal request to pave that and make it a parking area. To improve that parking area for PCS. But the city has always owned the property, and the understanding was always that it was the city-owned property.
So, my understanding is, in the plot map that I have for PCS, that I agree that the parking spaces that are closer to the existing water treatment plant and the arborvitae's, yes, that is city property. But as I understand it, we have a flag lot that extends out and it runs along the north side adjacent to Hughes Excavation with another 10 parking spots, and that would be on PCS land. If I'm wrong, then that would be a big concern, I guess. But that's what I understand and what I've seen and what the executive director has told me. And then, so 10 spaces, as I know it, owned by the city, 10 by PCS. Again, that's what I understand. Are all going to go away, and the only access now will be one corridor road. Once the treatment plant's built, there'll just be a corridor for traffic to get to our building and park.
Yeah, the flag portion of that's not wide enough for access and parking. So what's parking there now will have to go away because that will be the access back to PCS. So those parking spaces will have to go away.
So Chris, is that flag? I'm sorry, that's the city land in your opinion?
No, the flag's PCS.
It is
Yeah,
PCS,
that's PCS. Just.
And is that wide enough for that flag, is it for 2 vehicles going both ways or 2 one way, or is it just a single width?
I have to look at the map and see what it is. I'm not sure how wide that flag lot is.
So there's no way parking and drive through then on that.
It very much seems similar to the property I live on, which is a flag lot. And my driveway is not big enough for me to drive down it and to have people park alongside of it. It's an access road essentially to a piece of property. Any further questions? No? Thank you for the comment. I appreciate it. Yeah, we'll be incorporated in this conversation as we move forward.
Okay, thank you very much. May I stay
Okay.
for a little bit?
Yes, absolutely.
Shut down?
Thank you.
Thanks so much, I appreciate you.
So we have on the agenda also minutes. Have a motion to approve.
So many.
Excellent.
And a second.
Thank you. So we have a motion to approve. All in favor, please use your hand. Say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Yeah. So Next, we have discussion of social service funding and transient lodging tax. How do you want to kick off that conversation?
Sure, I can do that. Give a little quick overview. Each year, each budget year, we sit down and calculate how much we're going to set aside for the social service grants, social service agency grants, the utility assistance funding, and the tourism grant funding. For the social service, we set aside 35% of the state revenue sharing, which amounted to $41,476 to be allocated. For the utility assistance, we set aside $8,575. And for the TLT, or the tourism grant funding, we have $5,000 that we get from Benton County every year. Plus, we're estimating that we're going to receive $30,400 for the other city TLTs. So, but we split that 50%, so there's $17,700 available. In July, we sent out an RFP to all three of these programs, and for the social service, we had 7 responses, and 1 additional was request made by PCS, Philomath Service. For the utility assistance, we received our usual 2, I believe. Yeah, and then for the TLT, we received 3. So you have a package. We've gone through it. We've determined they met the criteria. We do have some comments. I don't know, how would you like us? You read the same thing. You probably saw the same thing, but one thing that jumped out at me was they all met the purpose of the RFP. The Benton Habitat for Humanity, they changed structure. It used to be sweat equities. I don't know what happened. They've changed to, they're going to keep the ownership of the land, and the people are going to sign leases. We caught on to that about 2 weeks ago, when we got somebody coming in saying they want to turn on water service. We're moving in, we're leasing the property. So it changed.
Leasing the home or leasing the land?
I don't know. That's the
think
right.
they've always leased land.
That was, from when I did the tour of the property on Ninth, he explained that to us. That when the very first house was done, and we did that tour. Now they're on house 1, 2, 3, 4, right? He explained that piece of them owning the land on this particular property.
Okay.
So that it's not an organizational, if I understand it, it's a locational.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I don't think that's a change. I think that's what
Correct.
they need. In the case they are gonna have long-term owning of the land, and the person who's living there will own them.
Okay. A little strange, but that's okay. And then for the bountiful backyard, I read the request, the purpose of the request, and I really couldn't see how they were going to use it. So that's like I said, these are comments that I see.
I'll note though that we aren't able to see all of their requests for that.
Normally what they do then is they print it out, but you're right, they didn't do it on this one, you're right. Normally all the other ones did. But I think that's all
I think it's just a function of the.
those are the only comments I had for all of them. So, I mean, I'm going to turn it over to you. I mean, I think Ruth sent out her estimate or whatever you want to proposal. I'm sure y'all have a proposal.
Yeah, so I asked Ruth to put this together. This is funding suggestion if we funded the folks that asked for less than $5,000 full, and then divided up amongst what that would look like.
I'll take one.
Yeah, so what, I'm gonna use my nifty glasses, which I've mentioned. Yeah, so what I had Ruth pull together was, anybody who asked for less than 5,000 if we funded them, how much we left, and if we divvy that up amongst the remainder folks, what would that look like? So, that's what we have here, as something to consider. If possible, we discuss each of these one at a time. And we're starting with social services. I noted the same thing that Mike did, that on the backyard, they didn't really discuss how funding would be allocated or utilized. I believe that there was, I mean, do you believe that there was additional text that is not included in this text?
Definitely.
This was hand delivered, it was
I
printed
figured.
and delivered to me. So I did not, this was not submitted electronically, as you can see, all the ones that were submitted electronically, the type ran over in place, I created an additional narrative sheet.
Okay.
So
We don't know.
we don't know.
On that note, though, it does say 3,000 or 6,000, so it sounds like they want one or two of something.
So,
I plugged 3,000 into the chart just simply because there was no indication of what the intent was for the funding.
unfortunately, we have the information that's here. It was hand delivered. This is what we have.
And I apologize for the quality again. It was a reprint of a.
So, personally, I've advocated for a similar way of allocating the funds in the past, and that we fund the folks in full who ask for a smaller amount of money, and then that we divvy up the folks evenly amongst the others. I feel like all of these organizations are worthy and deserving of funding. I personally have a hard time. I have a hard time pushing for some being worth more than others or providing more value. The UIAC has had their funding cut a lot. They service a lot of families, whereas I know ABC House, serves sexually abused children, which I feel like is really a very worthy effort as well. So, anyway, I'd love to hear your input. Go ahead, Councilor Andrade.
May I ask why the remaining is split up with PCS when they did not submit?
I did not know
We're for
what
discussion.
Oh, gotcha.
Counselor
We're-
Lurie's discussion was going to be, so I just made a random suggestion that can be changed.
That's totally cool. I was just curious if there was something that I wasn't aware of.
It's a great question.
May I have a minute?
Yeah.
So, I like you, Mayor. Oh,
I'm joking. You can have as many as you want.
I like you feel that all these organizations have done phenomenal things for our community and continue to do for our community and our county. According to my calculations, we are about 32% over, if we totaled everything up, it was 32% more than what we had to issue. So I just did an average and took 32% off each one, and then that brought us to balance. So if the request was 5,000, I gave them 3,400. If the request from that, making the deduction equal on each one, if that makes sense. So everyone got an equal deduction, because I thought that sounded equitable and fair. But then in listening to what you're talking about 5,000 and under, and some of the smaller requests, like the one for 1,500 on Meals on Wheels, 1,500 isn't a substantial ask, I think, for us. And maybe having a place where we set the line, well, 5,000 is, we'll go ahead and give anyone who asks 5,000 or less. Maybe that is a nice way of being more equitable and being more just in that decision of requests and how to allocate the set amount of funds that we have as fairly as possible amongst the requests that are being made. Some are more, 12,000, 10,000, 15,000. But in contemplating, I could support, I initially came in thinking I want to give everyone 68.4% of their ask, but then in seeing this new proposal of the top 1, 2, 3, 4 that are, over the 5,000 mark, giving them, I think that sounds, allocating it this way maybe sounds a little bit better, because that way those that have greater needs, like strengthening rural families or the others, get a bit more than just the 5,000 allotment, or and it almost equals out to what the 68% of their ask is. Because, for instance, strengthening rural families, if they get 68% of their ask, it comes to right about 6,800, where we're giving them here 6,500. So that's pretty close to giving them 68% of their ask. So, and that allows those that ask for 5,000 or less to have their full ask given, rather than lessened by 32%. So it does
I
seem
think
like,
if you, I appreciate that feedback comment. I feel like if just reduced everybody by a certain percentage, that there would be every incentive for folks to ask for $100,000 next year. And I just feel like we don't have that much money. I feel like all we can do is the best. We don't have a little bit that we can serve a number of organizations a little bit rather than giving them their full ask. So yeah, I feel like this is a more equitable way of distributing the funds. Councilor Andrade.
So I guess before I can really, comment on what I think of these proposals, I guess my question is, do we still want to be using $6,000 from this fund to be paying Philomath Community Services for the parking? And then I feel like once we've decided upon that, then it might make it easier to figure out the allocation between all the different services, agencies.
Yeah, personally, I feel very comfortable with the decision the council made in taking the funds out of the community services. I feel like the social services, I feel like it was in support of a social service agency. We only have a certain amount of dollars. I feel like it's a reasonable use to allocate those funds in the way that we did.
If there is desire to do that, I'd suggest come with two proposals, because current direction from the city council is that that's where it's going to come from. That was a vote by the council. So if there's going to be a recommendation to have that come from another source, then I would prepare one allocation as directed by the council with the 6,000 coming out, and then a second allocation, which would be identifying another source for that funding, and then the balance of that could then be allocated separately. But I think we'd want to do both, just to make sure we're following council direction.
Because we are supposed to talk about it here, right? I remembered council saying that suggestion, is that correct?
Right. So I'm just saying that suggestion should probably be two options.
Yeah, I understand, thank you.
I as well I'm comfortable with the allocating the 6,000 from our social service agency fund. So I think that was discussed and recommended by the council. I'm still comfortable with that decision.
And I honestly don't have strong feelings either way. So.
Sounds great. So we have consensus that we'll move forward with another option that includes this total amount of funding. Councilor Andrade, you said that you wanted to first make that decision. Did you have any further discussion on this?
Yeah, well, I guess I was thinking originally, and I asked staff and then just didn't check my email until too late to about whether the 41,476 included the 6,000 from PCS or not. And so I had originally made some allocations based on that total number. And thinking that PCS had submitted an application. So I feel like whatever I had suggested is void. But I do, I mean, considering the fact that they did not, submit an application, I think perhaps, your funding suggestion, could eliminate that additional, 1494, and then have that spread out between the remaining, over 5,000 requests from the remaining agencies.
I don't feel strongly either way about that. It'd be an approximate $300 $500 per to the other organizations. That's right. But feel strongly either way. Chris?
So I was gonna make a point not to advocate, but I'm gonna put an application out there a little bit. I really take to heart where PCS is coming from and the perception that they feel like is underway with the request for the 6,000. And I understand this for parking lot. I mean, it's part and parcel there. The fact of the matter is PCS has expenses throughout the year. They support community throughout the year. I don't know that I'd be so quick to not include them if there's additional funding and the allocation that we're gonna make. We know that they're gonna have expenses and we know that they're serving families within our community. And yes, there's a $6,000 give for helping reimburse for parking lot expenses, which by the way, did not cover the full cost of those parking lot expenses, right? So I wouldn't be, if I was gonna advocate, I would say that we include them in the mix of some funding if there's like an overage, knowing the reasons why they didn't submit an application. It's not because they don't have a need this year.
And it was the perception, right? They didn't want to be perceived as being too greedy.
Correct.
Is what I understand.
And, you know, being the liaison for PCS and being a volunteer there as well, I wholeheartedly support the additional 1494. I think the numbers there really need help, and the and depth of the work that is being done there is not minimizing. It's not, and so any additional, if it's a 1494 that we can do to aid their organization in helping others in our community, I'm there 100%.
Councilor Day?
I completely agree with all of those things, except the one, I'll just say that the one reason why I have held reservations is looking at last year's donations compared with the requested funds for this year, and kind of trying to combine that to get a sense of like how much each organization has received. And they all tend to add up to about the same. And so I don't know. I know it's only about $1,500, but also noting how much we cut to some of the other organizations in previous years, I think. I don't know. I was just thinking of that.
And to be fair, like we don't have a figure showing how some of these organizations' contributions have gone down a lot over time.
Oh yeah.
If I remember correctly, I think Strengthening Rural Family, or is it PYAC that's gone down a lot?
PYS
And Strengthening Rural
reduced every year for the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, that's true.
But so it sounds like we are pretty much in consensus on this. Do I have a motion or a recommendation we can all send to council?
Sure.
With-
Oh, I thought you were saying just like, do we have a consensus? Sure, I guess we do.
No, I was asking. I feel like we're near that, and I feel like maybe
You're asking for a motion.
or something. Yeah.
There is a suggested motion at the bottom of the funding table, and you would just list the name of the agency and the recommendation amount for each one.
Or if you're comfortable with the mayor's chart, you could just cite that because it's been provided and part of the record. So you could cite that and then just make note of any changes to that if that's simpler.
I'll make a motion then. I vote that I make a motion that we embrace or, I'm looking for the word. Recommend, thank you, I'm getting there. Recommend the suggestion of the chart that Mayor Chaz Jones has recommended to the council, allocating the amount requested for those are 5,000 or less in full, and that those that are over that amount will be allocated accordingly as the chart implements.
Okay, so we have a motion made by Councilor Nielsen. I'll second that. All in favor, any further discussion?
One moment, please. Doing some quick math.
Let me ask a question. Just the numbers that you got here, that's if it's voted on, that's what we're gonna go at.
That's the recommendation.
This one's yours? Okay. Thought maybe it was Bruce, I wasn't sure. Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Councilor,
I'm comfortable.
any further discussion?
Yeah, I guess just, you know, if we were to fund them the extra money, it's about 18,500 that we would have given them within the past 2 years. And then everyone else is below that. PYAC and Strengthening Rural Families would be about 10 and a half, 9.8 for Maxtivity, 14.5 for Benton Habitat for Humanity, and 10 for ABC House. And so that's it, just thinking about spreading things out. And I know that there were extenuating circumstances, and then also it ended up not being used toward the extenuating circumstance. And so it's just one tiny little thing that's kind of, it's hard to, it's just me being nitpicky, I suppose, but
I hear you. I mean, yeah. We have a motion, seconded. So all in favor, please raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, so the motion carries 2-1. So we're just gonna send this to recommend to council. Council Andrade, I would encourage you to voice your concerns at the council meeting as well.
yeah.
Make sure that is heard.
It's clarifying nothing against them, it's just trying to be as equal as possible. in the presentation.
Thank you for that discussion, and I think that was great. So next, let's talk about the utility assistance funding requests. We have 10,575 available to distribute. We have requests of $11,000. In the past, we've split it equally. Anyone feel strongly that it should not be split equally?
I mean, I was just thinking about the idea of like, Dynamosis did ask for more than we care, and so, not that it's much, again, no strong opinions either way.
I just really get nervous about someone asks, therefore we must give.
Yeah.
Like, because people ask for way too much all the time.
Yeah.
So
I think dividing it equally sounds fair, and I think it kind of takes some things off the table as far as who we prefer and our decisions were made in just half and half. I think that sounds fair.
So we have recommended the motion, or do we have a motion? On the table.
To help with the math, if you take the $10,575 that's available and you divide it in two, you get $5,287.50. I don't think Mike likes dealing in pennies.
Okay.
You could give Bina Moses the extra $1.
There you go.
It doesn't matter, whatever council wants, or maybe wants to do.
Councilor Nielsen.
Okay, I will make a recommendation then. For Utility Assistance Fund, I recommend that we allocate $5,287.50 to Vina Moses, and this equal amount to We Care, totaling $10,575.
Thank you. You have a motion made by Councilor Nielsen. I'll second that motion. Any further discussion?
Can I make one comment, please, on this? I do think it's important, and I'll just make a contrast real quick. You know, we used to have the service agencies and the utilities come and present to the committee and talk about what they've done in the past years, their plans for future years, their plans for the funding. And I think that that created some problems, especially if one organization couldn't attend. They kind of got penalized for just not being able to be at a meeting. But it did, I do feel like we've lost a little bit of the review of the applications themselves in this process. And I know that the three of you have done that on your own outside of this meeting. But I do think it's important that we look at not just what the request was, but we look at what are they doing and how many people are they serving and what are the services they're providing. And I just think going forward, we just need to make sure that, again, not only that you're doing that individually, but it might be helpful in this meeting to have a little bit more open discussion about the application itself and not just look on, well, how much do they ask for, but to really dig down and say, well, based on these numbers, it looks like this is the number of youth that they're serving. This is the number of families they're serving. These are the types of cases that they're looking at. We request all of that in their application. It'd just be actually helpful for some of that to come to light a little bit so that we do ensure that we're not just rewarding organizations that are more willing to ask for more money, but that we are trying to distribute that they're bringing to the community. They all bring value, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody should get the same dollar amount either, right? Because there are different values for different services being provided. And equity and equality are very different, and the caution always just go to equal because it feels good, when equity takes maybe a little bit harder, it takes a little bit harder look to get there. So again, I think the 50-50 is fine in this case, and would support that. And I think you're doing a great job. Just, again, want to make sure that we're not losing out on some of the added flavor that we used to get when we were getting presentation from the individual organization.
I would say probably the more important thing besides like, well, actually, I don't know if it would be more important now that I say it out loud, but one of the important things to consider also is the need, because they could be giving valuable services, but they might be getting all of the grants. And so like, I think that is more of the equity piece as opposed to the value that they provide. Because the truth of the matter is they could very well be providing even more valuable resources if they were given the money that they haven't been given, so.
Good point.
And because you brought this up, I will respectfully disagree. Because speaking to what Councilor Andrade was talking about, in many ways, I know the dollar amounts here, they mean a lot to the organizations that we're giving it, but I also feel that it's really difficult. It's really difficult to hear the words that someone offers, or to read the text that someone offers, and to know that that's not framed like in one particular light, right? Like, we all can frame things to be that we have a lot of need, that we have provide a lot of value. But I've also known lots of organizations that are really good at framing and really good at messaging, and other ones that are just so low at capacity, they don't have time to deal with all that, is like struggle. And wading through all of that is pretty much impossible for us in this type of group without doing a ton of research. And I don't think that's what's being asked of us. I feel like what we've done today is equitable. I feel like it's fair. It's not, I don't know. I'll probably get heck about this tomorrow, but I feel like this is some of the best things that we could have done with the information we have, and I feel very comfortable and happy with it myself.
And for instance, in these two documents, these are public access documents. Could the public come and see these applications if they came or online? Are they allowed to?
Yeah.
So I think there is value in having discussion and talking about numbers and proposals that are on the written word, reciting what's been on the application. But is that our best use of of time. And it is our best use of the resources that we have, and the limited time. The Moses Center talks about 7,000 people in Benton County. They serve 7,000. We Care talks about applications of 702. Does that make one, 100 times better than the other? No. But, so numbers can be deceiving as well. And I think we do our best effort. I know my best efforts are to review the application and to really contemplate who will be best served by these funds, and how will we be fair, and how can we really meet the needs the best of our ability. And sometimes that means some get less than others, or some get less than what they've requested, and then that is unfortunate. In a perfect world, we would get everyone what they need, right? We would have enough money for everybody, and there would be no needs. We would all just share, but that's not the reality of life. So I think we do the best that we can, and I am comfortable. I don't vote unless I'm comfortable with what we're doing, and so in this, dividing these fundings 50-50 sounds right to me. And even though the numbers that they may serve are different, and maybe their administrative staff is different in each organization, and that's just the truth of nonprofits. But I think we do the best we can with what we know.
Thank you. So let's discuss transient lodging tax.
I don't think so.
Okay, so that was after a second. Okay, all in favor of passing utility assistance funding motion as, please raise your hand, say aye. Aye. Motion carried. Unanimously. Let's discuss transient lodging tax. Yes. We have the applications, the amount, exactly the amount of money that we have available.
I've been struggling. In light of some comments that had been made in the Inclusivity Committee in July, and in light of a recent email sent to council and staff today, I think it's important to hold back on giving any funding to the Frolic and Rodeo until they can, have a discussion to answer to some of the comments made by a board member who was not speaking on their behalf, but did say that they would fly a Nazi flag for First Amendment rights and such. Or like they wouldn't fly it themselves, they would allow it to be flown, and kind of equating that to allowing the pride flag to be flown. I'm not explaining this very well, but basically there are some really concerning comments that have been made, and I wouldn't feel comfortable giving the Frolic money until they've addressed that, especially considering that their statement on equity, inclusion, and diversity practices is just saying that they'll abide by the federal law of not discriminating on the basis of protected classes. And on that note, I think, we have some of these questions for a reason, and I would highly encourage us to perhaps, I don't know if like in the actual application, or, like when emailing everyone who's applied, to say like, we really do want more than just a sentence, more than the bare minimum, because like I don't think it's fair, we're not abiding by the city's values by you know, by supporting organizations that aren't even, I'm not saying they're not trying, but I think it's important that we support organizations that clearly make strides towards the city's values, which includes, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion, among other things, of course.
I do think it's hard for us to sit in judgment of other people's efforts to include diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's a post that necessarily, I don't know if I'm comfortable to be the ultimate judge in what is the city standard of, what I mean to say, if you look at the application for the Chamber of Commerce, their description of equity, and you look at the one from the Philomath Frolic and Rodeo, they're pretty comparable. A one sentence thing on each one.
I was not happy with that either.
Society entered more, and seek out stories and mention about seeking out stories of BIPOC and LGBTQIA and Native peoples, and that is very admirable, and I really appreciated their description of their practices, and I thought it was very inclusive and very thorough. But I don't know if we can judge the entire application based on one particular question, and that's what I feel we may be overstepping our bounds in narrowly saying, because of this one question, we are not going to consider making that judgment call that we should exclude one application over another based solely on either their answer to one question, unless it's totally preposterous, or based on, I don't know, I wasn't at the inclusivity meeting. I did listen to it, the one you're referring to, and I do receive emails. But in the same light, just think that we have to be careful in our treatment of each other and of all organizations within our community. And I hope to think that I'm an optimist. I'm a person that looks on the positive and strives to see the good even in things that I don't understand or maybe fully agree with. I still try to give individuals the benefit of the doubt, that their intentions are good, and their intentions are not to create harm to any particular individual. So that's just the way I feel.
Certainly. Councilor Andrade?
I try to also give people the benefit of the doubt. And try to remember that intentions and impact aren't always the same thing. And your intentions can be good, but the impact is that, like, it's really not okay. And I am holding space for that to be true of this situation, which is why I don't feel, which is why I would rather not award them money until they have explained themselves, or, like, you know, been able to say whether the board, like, does in fact, you know, apply, you know what I mean, like, what, so that they can explicitly state their values. I'm not saying to not award it to them at all. I would rather hear from them first because we haven't heard from them. And I'm under the impression it's because they haven't met yet or will have just, or had just met recently or something to that effect. So I understand not wanting to judge based on one question, but for me, this question, so like if we're gonna compare to the chamber, I was not happy with their response to that question, but you know, I think that's where my suggestion of like, okay, well maybe when we email to let, you know, the agencies know about the outcome of these meetings, that we say, hey, by the way, just so you know, we're looking for more. So like next year we'll be taking that into account more with like how we decide to allocate things, or having it like bolded and italicized and underlined on the application itself, or something to that effect of like, no, we didn't add this question for Checkwitty. Like we didn't do it just to check the box. Like we did it because we want to know that, you know, we're creating this community and you know, allowing for the community to grow in more inclusive ways. So I think that was most of what I wanted to. Oh yeah, so like I wouldn't, like I'm fine with giving funding to the Historical Society and the Chamber this year, and then maybe the Frolic and Rodeo once they've had a chance to discuss and respond based on that response. I just, for me, allowing someone to fly a flag that promotes hate, i.e. the Nazi flag, that is not okay. And I think that's a hard line we need to draw.
Thank you for that comment. I will mention that I completely, 100% disagree with your take on the flying of the blue lights.
Oh, I wasn't talking about the Blue Lives flag. I was talking about the Nazi flag. A comment was made that said that they would fight for the right of someone
Yeah,
to.
that's okay. That's just silly, I think, to talk about something that been no evidence has happened.
A statement was made in a public meeting.
I think the statement was not in that context.
It was in that context.
Okay.
I made the statement, so I can tell you the context. It was to give an extreme example of what this frolic was and wasn't going to do. The point of that conversation was the frolic is not going to monitor speech and or flags and or anything that's going through the parade. And the example given of the Nazi flag was an extreme example to counter the extreme of the blue line flag, which was being used almost with as much hatred as the Nazi flag, which was not the intent of that flag. So the intent was to draw a conclusion or to draw a similarity between the blue line flag and the Nazi flag, and to point out that the frolic is not going to put itself in a situation where we're distinguishing between how people interpret different flags. Yes, there's more consensus around the Nazi flag, but in that meeting at their time, there seemed to be very general consensus that that blue line flag was a white supremacy flag. So that was the similarity that was being drawn. It was not to say that this Frolic and Rodeo's policy is that we are going to fly the Nazi flag next year.
I didn't say that.
And it was not anything like that. It was an extreme example that was given at the time to make the point that the Frolic and Rodeo does not ask for, nor in the future will ask for, what flags are you going to display on your float and decide whether or not to allow an entry into the parade based on that. That was the point. The Frolic and Rodeo has a long history of being welcoming and accepting of all different groups and organizations of people that want to come and participate in the parade, and that was the point that was being made.
I want to bring us back to the conversation at hand.
Yes.
And I don't want to discuss the Nazi flag. That's irrelevant to this conversation.
It is very
No,
relevant.
it is not.
If that was your point, it
No.
was not clear. Because you did say you would fight for the right of anyone to fly any flag they wanted, even if it was the Nazi flag.
So I'm gonna bring this conversation back. Yes. We are gonna make a recommendation to the council. Council can have further discussion on this.
That's fine. I was just finishing
It's fine.
the story.
So these are transient lodging tax dollars. These are meant to go to organizations that are promoting tourism within the city of Philomath. I think all three of these organizations do that, and I think that the ask amounts are somewhat proportional to the amount of tourism that is brought to or will be brought to the city going forward. So I think that these requests are more than appropriate, and I will say, I think it's completely inappropriate for the city to withhold funding in a punitive manner and somehow of a moral compass matter over an organization like the Frolic and Rodeo. It's completely inappropriate from my perspective.
I have a question about how the dollar amounts were come up with. How did we end up with the exact amount of money that we, did we make recommendations to the different organizations?
No, I didn't see the chamber or the cycle. The Frolic and Rodeo was based on need. They knew the total dollar amount, but that 15,000 was determined for the request before either of the other two were seen. So I think it was just chance. Again, I can't speak to whether the Frolic or whether the chamber or historical society knew what the Frolic had asked for. But I think all those applications, I couldn't tell you when they came in, what order they came in.
Do we have the 17,700 in that account, on the tourist-related activity account?
By
So
the end of the year, yeah.
by the end of the year, we will have adequate to cover that. We're not extending ourselves beyond what we.
We're guesstimating
We're guesstimating.
on the 30 grand that we're getting, but, last year we got 31. So far the economy's on the same vein as it was last year, so.
It's
It's
reasonable.
not a reach, it's reasonable.
It's reasonable.
The city's TLT fund comes in quarterly, so we get those in quarterly payments from Department of Revenue. So, we'll know, the other part of that is it's 50-50, so if we're gonna short ourselves, we're gonna short ourselves, right? It'll be money that the city, if TLT, for example, fourth quarter TLT drops off because there's some event and nobody's coming to the hotels anymore, and so we see a major drop, the city would see all that, right? So it would be the city's funding that we spend on tourism dollars, like for the new reader board sign that we want to do, or wayfinding signs in the downtown area. There's tourism related projects that the city plans to spend money on, and we would just have less money for those projects. But the tourism funds, we do those early in the year along with these kind of early on. So if we don't receive that full revenue, we would just see that in less money the city would have to spend on our tourist-related projects.
So I personally am not comfortable with not funding the Frolic and Rodeo for this purpose, for the reasons stated previously. How do you feel?
I was about to make a motion that we should fund these as recommended. That would be the 1,500 for the Benton County Historical Society, 1,200 for the Philomath Chamber, and 15,000 for the Frolic and Rodeo, and 17,700 from the Transient Lodging Tax.
So that's the recommendation that you would send.
Yes, correct.
Motion. Okay, so I will second that motion. Councilman Crowdy?
To clarify, I appreciate that the Frolic and Rodeo provides community events and maintains the city-owned space, and that they bring in tourists and, all of the opportunities that they provide. I was hoping to pause on giving them money to allow them the chance to respond and refine any sort of, thoughts about how to help create a more welcoming community.
Be careful. The inclusivity committee had the discussion about the incident with the flag and the parade, and the inclusivity committee decided that it was going to take no further action. The chair of the committee said they would reach out to the individual that complained and say that it had been talked about, as he had committed that it would be talked about. He did that. That was the end. So there really is no return and report from the frolic. There's an individual in the community that has been advised that they need to take their complaint to the Frolic and Rodeo and have it resolved in that way. But I don't see a position for the city to take a stance on more action required or feedback or report back from the Frolic on that incident. Based on the conversation from the Inclusivity Committee, that is not requisite of the Frolic community.
Last response.
I understand all of that. And I think that was mostly out of respect for the original person who had sent in the concern to the council and staff. But this is different. For like this specifically is, you know, it's giving money to an organization. I don't want it to seem like we are okay with some things that we should not be okay with, and based on our values and principles as a city. And I think that it's important to it's like rewarding them basically, and I think that I think that I would like to hear what they have to say, and I think that we can request that of them.
I do think that sounds counterintuitive of what the Inclusivity Committee, which has awarded that decision to counsel us, that your suggestion seems counterintuitive to what they recommend.
No, because we wanted to give the chance for the person who brought the concern to follow up on it themselves. But this is a matter of they're asking the city for funds. This has nothing to do with the Inclusivity Committee or like this. It has everything to do with, do we want to give money to them?
And this is just a recommendation to the council.
Yeah.
Who will be considering a request, and then you can bring up any concerns to them, and that will be the body that actually ultimately decides how the
Yes.
funds will be allocated.
A large part of the conversation inclusivity was about the appropriateness of the Inclusivity Committee taking action on complaints like this that come into the city about other organizations. And that was, I would argue, a larger part of the conversation was it is not the role of the Inclusivity Committee to require or demand that private or public or private organizations, other nonprofits in the community, take any action. That we can make recommendations and we can provide opportunities for individuals to get in contact with those organizations if that's where the complaint is driven. But the city doesn't itself bear any responsibility for what happened, nor should the Inclusivity Committee feel like there should be any action that needs to be taken by the city or the committee. And I would argue that was the greater decision that was made to not take any action. It wasn't respect to the person who complained. It was about, it is not the role nor the reason why the Inclusivity Committee was started in the first place.
I disagree with that. I think it was mixed. That there were people, myself included, who thought that we should reach out, host this other person doing their thing. And I think one of the committee members made an excellent point of the fact that, you know, this is still happening on city-owned land that we are leasing, and even though the Frolic and the city are not part of the same entity, they kind of are implicitly. Like there's a very close relationship, and so a lot of people see them as being, you know, that the city fully, like that is part of the city's umbrella, and so I think the perception is also important, not just whether or not it actually is. And so, you know, having a stance from the city is important.
That's not, that's not part of the conversation that we're having today, nor is it on the agenda to discuss. So with that, I'm calling the question. All in favor of passing the transient lodging tax grant request as moved, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All opposed, please raise your hand and say nay. Motion carries. With that, we are going to have a conversation around the city manager's annual evaluation timeline. Chris, you gonna be here for that part of that conversation?
Yeah, for the timeline part.
Okay, so
We looked at last year, Ruth pulled this together, so we looked at last year's time frame and just pulled that forward into this year. We do have the evaluation from last year with some of the changes that I know were missed from the year before the Councilor Andrade brought up, and so we've
Not there.
made those,
These
the
are not
corrections right there.
No.
Yeah, so we've got the old one, so we have the newer version, we'll get there. So we will make sure that the version goes out. But time frame wise, just want to make sure there's that.
any comments on the time frame? I have a pile of papers in front of me that. There you go. So presenting to council on
October 14th.
14th. And then completed by November 4th. And then review that prior to the November 12th meeting. Sound good? Andrade?
Do we have a meeting before the 14th? I can't remember.
City council meeting?
Finance and admin.
We have only the,
October 14th is the next city council meeting.
yeah,
Finance and
finance and admin, we only have the,
We have an executive section scheduled for October 4th. For the Finance and Administration Committee.
Okay, then, can we have the corrected version, and discuss that in that meeting as well? Because I'm assuming that we're all, it says, once the committee approves of the evaluation, but we don't have the corrected version in front of us, so we can't approve it today.
so can we get that corrected version and then bring that back to that conversation on the October 4th?
You'll just come out of executive session at the end of the meeting and have that as an agenda item in public session.
Awesome. I don't think it'll take long, but I just,
Does the
The timeline
timeline
looks
sound
good.
good? So assuming that the timeline looks good and we actually have that updated evaluation form, I think that should be a pretty quick agenda. With that, we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you.